We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. this week, and across the country, really, folks are working to digest an executive order from the Trump administration regarding meatpacking plants and some general authority the federal government is exercising and some potential liability that they're looking to address. Sometimes I'll let you a little behind the curtain here. One of the nice things about being the host of this program and Phil being the actual brains of it is occasionally I can just pose a question and just leave the difficult explanation to Phil, which is what I'm going to do in this case. Phil, what does this executive order mean, and what should we be watching for, and just what has transpired this week in terms of this executive order?
Well, that's a good question. That's the way we always answer a question we don't know exactly the answer to. Legal experts are still seem to be debating what exactly the executive order means. There are basically two parts to it. Basically, what the president done is delegate to the secretary's authority under the Defense Production Act for him to make sure that the meat processing continues to operate, and extends this authority potentially to other parts of the food's supply chain. And in part two, gives him some authority to work with FEMA and other agencies to make sure processing plants get the equipment, supplies that they need. And of course, what they really need right now is personal protective equipment and testing capability in order to make sure that workers going back to plants or working in plants are healthy.
Yeah, and we joked and laughed a little bit, at the start of this video and the start of that question. We're not trying to be flippant. There's just a lot of people that I've talked to, that Phil talked to this week, that we're just asking some kind of basic questions. If this, then what? And a lot of the people, the sources that we're talking to, the experts in these industries, are saying, frankly, they don't know either. And as we sit here right now, we're waiting on some Department of Agriculture guidance to clarify some of these questions.
Yeah, well, there's two different issues about keeping plants operating and also getting the personal protective equipment and testing. On the first question, the issue of basically whether the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, can force plants to keep operating, that seems to be, from what legal experts tell us, a bit of an open question, because it all comes down to whether the Secretary can override the wishes of state and local authorities who want to close these plants temporarily for cleaning and to stop the spread of the virus in the local community. And ultimately that might actually have to be decided by the courts if it came to that, if one or the other side sued. The other question is, how much power, real authority, does this give the secretary to make sure that the personal protective equipment and testing gets to the plants? We're expecting more from USDA on that in terms of what it means. That in both these issues, we'll just have to some extent wait and see.
Yeah, so obviously that's an issue that we're tracking, and I would encourage you to stay tuned to agripulse.com, and because we'll be keeping in touch with all of the various developments on this issue and bringing you more coverage as we have it available to us. But it's also important to recognize and underscore the reason we're having this conversation, the reason that this is something that folks are wondering about, is the very issue of these packing plants closing is producing a lot of stress on the food system and producers in farm country, as we're seeing a number of producers forced this week into some very difficult conversations about depopulating the herds that they've worked to produce. A lot of folks know that as the chicken and pork, especially beef to some extent as well, when those animals need to go to processing plants, they got to go. And at a certain point, they can get too large for some of these packing houses. And so we've seen and heard some anecdotal reports this week of depopulation occurring, and that's leading into some conversations about the next aid package that is going to be headed to farmers and ranchers potentially as Congress looks to return to town next week. And Phil, we saw some commentary, in the weeks leading up to the implementation and the drafting of this last bill in terms of what folks were looking for out of this last bill. And we're starting to see that again here this week.
Yeah, we're still, of course, waiting to see what the payments are going to be from the first tranche of aid. Secretary Perdue announced it a couple of weeks ago. Has not formally released the rules, including payment limits and how these payments will be calculated. A lot of commodity sectors are saying it's not nearly enough, and especially if you impose payment limits, which apparently USDA is talking about, probably in order to make the money go as far as possible. So now, obviously, there's a push in the next stimulus bill to include still more money, and a lot of needs and concerns starting to crop up in recent weeks. Certainly, the issues in meatpacking have become even more intense since Secretary Perdue announced this package a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. And so we see, in addition to some of the issues that folks are facing, we saw this week House Ag Committee Chair Colin Peterson making some comments in terms of things he specifically is going to be pushing for in this next aid package, specifically looking at things like the Commodity Credit Corporation and expressing some frustration with the way that fund has operated here in recent years, going as far as to say that he is going to push for a provision that would require a sign-off from the House and Senate Ag Committee chairs and ranking members for any potential CCC spending going forward. And obviously, there's a lot of political implications of something like that. A lot of farm lobbyists kind of scratching their head, looking down committee rosters, wondering who they might be dealing with in coming years on something like that. Phil, I got to imagine a provision like that is going to be hotly debated, perhaps hotly contested as they look at this kind of CARES Act 2.0.
Well, in recent years, the CCC authority at USDA has become more controversial, especially as more partisan the Congress is. When, if you remember, former Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack used the CCC authority back in 2010 up until the election, Republicans were very unhappy about that. And when they got control of the Congress, really restricted what he could do. While that restriction was lifted off with the trade war with China, Secretary Perdue has been very aggressive with the use of CCC authority. One person to really watch here, and she's already, regardless of what Chairman Peterson said, Senator Debbie Stabenow, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Agriculture Committee, had really was forcefully involved in the negotiations over the CARES Act, this big economic stimulus bill passed at the end of March. So she will, and she's very going to argue very vigorously on behalf of specialty crops, fruits and vegetables, dairy, and other sectors. And so you see, again, the regional play regional differences between commodities very much come into play the more once you get the authorizing committees, the ag committees involved.
Mm-hmm. And we're still watching for debates about this CARES Act 2.0, the provision of Chairman Peterson's that we just mentioned, but also looking to see what the Department of Agriculture is going to be rolling out in terms of the qualification language for the original CARES Act, the original $9.5 billion and $6 billion, that $16 billion in direct payments that producers are going to be looking for here. We've been told the effort toward the end of May is still the plan. We have not been talked off of that by officials or lobbyists or anyone else. So obviously that's something we're still watching for, is just how they're going to implement that bill and make farmers eligible for those payments, as well as what other potential funding might be coming from Capitol Hill in the near or perhaps a little bit more distant future, depending on which lawmaker you're listening to at any point in time. But it is important to note the Senate returning to Washington next week. The House originally scheduled to do so, but now that will not be the case. And so still watching for some potential action on Capitol Hill and at the Department of Agriculture in terms of the coronavirus response. But I think that's going to do it for this week. If we learn of more information, you can be sure to find it on agripulse.com, as well as all of the other various twists and turns of farm policy these days. Certainly, I joke frequently that we don't lack for content these days. I've been saying that joke for several months. I might need to come up with a new line. I don't know, but it's certainly a great time to be staying tuned to agripulse.com for all of your ag and food policy updates. But for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.